Hey everyone, today we're going to be creating a trading bot in Python that's going to buy and sell stocks based on comments that are posted on r/WallStreetBets. So if you're not familiar with WallStreetBets, it's a Reddit community for retail investors where people post what stocks they're trading or like what their views of certain trending stocks are and things like that. So this bot is going to do something sort of interesting in that it's not going to take what's being said on WallStreetBets at face value, but instead it's going to do the exact opposite of what people say on the subreddit. So in other words, what it's going to do is go on WallStreetBets, pull all of the comments, check to see what stocks are being mentioned in those comments, then do sentiment analysis on the comments to see what people think about each stock. And then it's going to go and short the stock if people on WallStreetBets think that it's going to go up. And then if they think that it's going to go down, it's going to buy the stock. This is sort of a joke on WallStreetBets, this idea that if you do the exact opposite of what everybody says, you'll make money. So I think it'll be an interesting thing to see if there actually is alpha here. So I do want to add that I did a pretty similar project, I think it was 4 years ago, prior to the GameStop short squeeze that brought a ton of traffic to WallStreetBets. And this project basically analyzed WallStreetBets comments and did back-tested trades based on a number of really hacky heuristics. And I was able to generate alpha, but it was all back-tested and past performance doesn't really indicate future performance. So in this video, we'll actually be making real trades. And I'm kind of curious to see if there's money to be made here. So yeah, let's get started. So there's a handful of prerequisites that we'll need to set up beforehand in order to create the bot. So the first one is the Python Reddit API wrapper. This is basically exactly what the title says. It's a wrapper around the public Reddit API that allows you to interact with Reddit posts using Python. It's a pretty simple pip install command, which is in the docs. I'll post the links to all of these in the description as well. The second one is an account on Alpaca. So Alpaca is a super easy to use stock trading API. It's totally free. There's really great Python support. You can just sign up on their website and get your API keys. Then we'll need to download the Alpaca Trade API, which allows us to interact with Alpaca using Python. And then lastly, we'll need to download TextBlob, which is a Python library that makes it really easy to do sentiment analysis on text. This is also just a single pip install command. So now that we have all of these prerequisites set up, now it's time to actually jump right in and start writing the code. So I have a totally blank Python file here called main.py, which is where we'll keep all of the code pertaining to the bot. So let's start by importing everything we need to build the project. Import praw, import Alpaca Trade API, and import TextBlob. We're also going to use a handful of libraries from the standard lib, so import time, JSON, CSV, and re. So the next step in this process is copying over the credentials that we'll need to access the Reddit API and the Alpaca API. These come in the form of a client key and client secret, and they're both available through their respective websites. I'm going to be setting these to just like fake values, but you should set it to the one that's set up to interact with your specific Reddit or Alpaca account. Then we're going to initialize the Reddit API client. And this is done using praw, just pass in your client ID and client secret. Then we're going to set a user agent, which is basically a string that Reddit uses to identify what bot is making these API calls. So after we have the Reddit API client initialized, we're going to do something very, very similar for Alpaca. So Alpaca also takes in an API key and a secret key, but they take an additional value called endpoint that tells them if you want to use a live trading account or a paper trading account. So since this bot is experimental, I don't want to risk live real money initially, so I'm going to be using the paper trading API endpoint. So now we need to think of a way of programmatically determining which stocks WallStreetBets is discussing or rallying around at the moment. So this is a problem that itself is not really programming based, but converting this into code can be sort of challenging. So my approach to this is narrowing the scope a bit to a specific thread that's posted at the end of each trading day called "What are your moves tomorrow?" So these threads are hugely popular on the subreddit. They usually have, thousands and thousands of comments. And the frequency at which these threads are posted means that, the sentiment towards a certain ticker could change day over day, and that would all be reflected in the current "What are your moves" thread. So what we need to do is write some code that always pulls the most recent "What are your moves" thread so that we can analyze the comments that are posted in it. So this is also sort of an interesting problem that I would encourage you to pause the video to see if you could think of a way to figure this out on your own. So the way that I would approach this is that I noticed something when I was searching for the most recent What Are Your Moves threads, and noticed that the same user posts this every single time. So if we write a function that goes and pulls all new posts from u/opinion is unpopular, and then return the first one with the words "What are your moves tomorrow" in it, that should give us the most recent What Are Your Moves thread 100% of the time. So now that we've sort of created this way of getting the most recent thread each time, we're going to actually convert that into code. So I'm going to create a new function called getWeeklyMostRecentLink, which is just going to return the contents of the most recent What Are Your Moves thread on WallStreetBets. So the first thing we're going to do is use the Reddit API client to go and load all of the posts from that Redditor with the username opinionisUnpopular. And we're going to iterate through their most recent posts. Then we'll go and see if the words "What are your moves tomorrow" are in the title. And if it is, then we're just going to return that post. And since we're sorting by new, that's going to be the most recent one. Then we're just going to go and test to make sure that this works. And it looks like it did. So we don't really care that much about the post title. We really just care about the comments. So we're going to create another method here called extract all comments from post. And we're going to pass in the most recent post, which is returned from that function we defined earlier. So something quick to note about PRA, specifically the post object, is that it doesn't return every single comment. It returns a list of, I think, the first 50 comments. So we're going to call another built-in function within PRA called replace more, which is going to go and fetch every single comment in the post. And then we're going to return a list of comment bodies, which are just strings containing the text of each comment. Just to show you what this actually means, I'm going to test this by calling extract all comments from post with the most recent What Are Your Moves threads, and then we're just going to print each of the comments. So now we need to get a list of every single stock ticker that could be present in a comment on Reddit. And we want to isolate this to only NASDAQ stocks, which should reduce it to a reasonable number. So I'm just going to do a search to look for CSVs that might have this info on GitHub. And the first one here has it. So we're just going to go through, make sure it has what we want. And then we're going to view the raw file on GitHub. And then I'm going to save this in our bot directory and name it stocks.csv. And then we'll go back to the code. So now that we have our stocks.csv file, I'm going to comment out that previous test that we wrote and create a new set called stock list. So if you're not familiar with a set, without getting too computer science-y, basically it's a data structure that allows you to check to see if something is contained within it really, really fast. This is a little bit better for our use case than something like a list, which you might be a little bit more familiar with. Then we're going to read our CSV file and save all of the stock tickers into the set. This code might look a little bit confusing, but basically all it's saying is I want to read in that CSV, I want to skip the header, and then I want to append the first column, which is the stock ticker, into my set, which is called stock list. And then from there, I'm just going to print each of the values in stock list to show you that it contains the tickers. So now we have this big list of stock tickers. The next thing we want to do is determine which stock tickers are mentioned in the comments in that What Are Your Moves thread. So I would encourage you to pause the video here to see if you can think of a better way to do this than what I'm going to show you here, because I honestly don't think this is the best way. So if anybody has any feedback, please leave a comment below. I'm definitely no expert in Python or programming in general, so I always appreciate any feedback from some of the more experienced folks about better ways to write this code. So my approach is that I created another set containing every word without any punctuation using regex. And then I'm taking an intersection of that set with the stock list set that we created earlier. So if you think of this like a Venn diagram, you have a Venn diagram of every word in each comment, and you have a Venn diagram of every stock. And then the intersection is the middle piece. The reason I did it like this is that it's a really fast operation to take set intersection and there's potentially 1,000 words or 2,000 words in each comment, and then there's like 4,000 stock tickers. So this operation is really fast. But I'm curious if there's a better way. So now I'm going to go and call this extract stock from comment function using the comments that we pulled from the what are your moves threads using the other two functions that we wrote. So you can see that some of these comments are pretty crazy looking due to the Reddit formatting, but it did extract the individual stock tickers from each comment. So now we want to create a function that takes the sentiment of each comment that contains a stock ticker in that thread. And we're going to be using something called sentiment polarity, which basically returns a value from -1 to 1, corresponding with how positive or negative this statement is. So like if it's a -1, then the statement is overwhelmingly negative. Whereas if it's +1, then it's a really positive statement. And obviously most conversations or sentences fall somewhere in between the two of those. So to do this effectively, we kind of need to reverse this problem statement a little bit, because we don't really care about what one specific comment says about a stock. We care more about what like the aggregate opinion is for each stock ticker that's mentioned, even if that stock is mentioned across multiple comments. So I think the best way to do this is to have a mapping between stock tickers and sentiment polarity values for comments in which that ticker is mentioned. So we have a mapping here, and then we're going to go and pull the most recent what are your moves thread. And we're going to go through each comment and pull out the stocks that are mentioned in the comment. And then we're going to go through each of these tickers and basically append the comment's sentiment to the mapping. That might sound super confusing, so I'm going to show you guys what this actually looks like. So we're just going to print the stock and then the sentiment of each comment that mentions it. So if you'll notice something, we actually don't really care that much about what each individual comment says. Again, we kind of want to get like an overall view of the subreddit's view towards a certain ticker. So we want to average these values. So I'm just going to do some hacky in-place Python operation to return average instead of list. So now if we print these again, you'll see that we have the stock ticker and then WallStreetBets sentiment towards that ticker on a given day. So now we can go and make trades using this info. So I'm going to create a function here that's literally just called make trade. And it's going to take in a stock ticker, and then we want to tell it if we want to short it or go long on the stock. And then we say if we're shorting the stock, then we want to go and submit a sell order. Now, I'm not even going to begin to pretend that I understand what's going on in this function call, so you guys can kind of just copy this, kind of like how I copied this from the docs. And then we're going to do basically the same thing if we're not shorting the stock. I'm just going to copy this and then change sell to buy. Then we're going to go down to the for loop that we wrote earlier, but instead of just printing out the stock and the sentiment, instead we're going to short the stock if the sentiment on WallStreetBets is positive, if it's greater than 0. And then if it's less than 0, then we're going to buy the stock. And then we're just going to sort of ignore cases where there's neutral sentiment. And then now we'll run it to see if the bot worked. And you can see that it did. So we have now created an algorithmic trading bot in Python that makes stock trades based on info gathered from WallStreetBets, or rather actively trades against the info that's gathered from WallStreetBets. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So like I said before, all the code for this is on GitHub. So if you want to take a look at that, I'll post a link to it in the description. If you're interested in these types of like algorithmic trading videos or like programming videos, please subscribe to my channel. I hope to be making a lot more of these in the very near future.